Hey guys, we're keeping up with the Joneses.
Hey guys, we just wanted to take a second before this video and just tell you how grateful we are that you're here watching this video with us.
Yeah, we're not the perfect couple, gurus, or subject matter experts, but we do care about people and we love to see and help them achieve their goals and potential.
For sure.
Yeah.
You know, we just have a relationship that we feel like is working, and so we wanted to kind of come on and share a little bit about how we do and view our relationship and our life together,
Right.
in the hopes that it may be of some benefit, and maybe if it is of that benefit, it can help you have the fulfilling, happy family that you'd like to have one day.
Yeah, and the success in life. So with that, we hope you enjoyed the video.
Bye-bye. Okay, babe, what do you want to talk about today?
So something that has been kind of getting under my skin lately is, why do millennials think so differently? I'm having a hard time understanding why kids or even adults are doing today are so different from the way that I believe or that I would do things.
Why are you curious about this, though?
I think because a lot of the changes that are going on or the things that they're doing different right now don't have good and successful results long term.
Oh, okay. So I guess like we were kind of talking about earlier, kind of like, you know, raising successful kids,
Yeah.
having successful
A lot of
marriages,
it
getting
has
into marriage.
to do with how the raising of the kids is so different.
Okay.
That is
Well,
one
that is
thing
interesting.
that is one thing that I have noticed that has been very shocking to me on how I'm not saying that I'm doing it right.
I think that it's been shocking to a lot of society. We kind of try to be old school with some
Yeah.
stuff, but we raise our children very differently than our parents raised us.
Yeah.
And we've even tried to get away from some of those new things, but we keep getting kind of sucked back into helicopter parenting.
I think what we've done with our parents, like things that our parents did versus how we're doing things a little bit different, we've taken the meat, spit out the bones type
Okay.
of method with how our parents used to do things. It's like we take the good things that we've seen bring good results,
Okay.
and we've embraced those, and things that were like, I don't think those really matter or affect, so we just did without those, and we kind of made our own way of doing things.
So you're talking about us, or you're talking about our generation? Because I'm a little confused.
I'm saying us specifically.
Oh, us specifically.
Yeah, we've
So
done
we
that.
we okay.
Yeah, but I'm saying the way that we do things.
But how are we
is a little
different?
bit-
Okay.
Is different than how a lot of society is doing the parenting and raising of children.
Okay. That's a big subject.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot written about it as of late.
One big bone of contention right now is gentle parenting.
Okay.
Gentle parenting, I think that there's some benefit to it, but I think it's a lot of work, and it takes parents being there, like we mentioned before, and we can go into it a little bit more, but it takes parents to do the nurturing and the presence of a parent to be there constantly in order for gentle parenting to kind of be beneficial.
Okay.
Otherwise,
So you're not saying that gentle parenting, or this, would you also call that helicopter parenting?
No.
Or okay, but you're not
gentle
saying that this.
parenting is how you discipline.
Okay, and you're not saying that that's necessarily a bad thing.
No, it's not.
Because I would think that many generations in the past, most generations in the past, would say that that is a bad thing.
Yeah.
But you're saying that you don't think that it's
don't-
inherently a bad thing.
I don't fully believe it's all bad.
Okay.
And it's that whole concept of taking the meat, spitting out the bones.
Well, see, that's
and
some
gentle parenting.
millennial in you right there. So just like I mentioned a second ago, we have things in us that we can't even really necessarily see that are millennial, but you know, it's hard to see ourselves in any measure of clarity. It's kind of like when you're working on a painting and you're so close to the thing that you know, when you look back, stand back 10 feet, it's a very different picture.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, like that in our lives as well, I believe. So, okay, I guess the thought would be, or the question would be that you're asking is like, why, if I got this right, why are millennials acting so differently than our parents and grandparents, etc.?
Right.
Because you feel like whatever it is that they're doing, that we're doing, is producing, less than, optimal results.
Yeah. The majority.
Okay.
Yeah. The majority of it. Yeah. Because I don't believe that we're, like I said, we're doing things a little bit different than most of them. But at the same time, we're millennials and we kind of are doing some of the millennial things that are beneficial, that are working.
That we think are beneficial and that are working.
Right.
Those things are going to be tested over time. We're going to see whether or not these new parenting methods are very successful. But I'm hoping that, you being a stay-at-home mom, us really stressing our roles and goals in our marriage, relationship, finances, parenting, etc., will give some structure to allow some of these different kinds of newer parenting methods to have good effect.
Right.
Okay.
They have good results.
So back to the question then. I guess the question would be something along the lines of if they're acting differently, that means they're thinking differently.
Right.
If they're thinking differently, where in the world did all this thought process come from?
Yeah. What provokes them to think differently?
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that it's important to really understand what's happened here, especially in our country, in the West, but really in our country here the last 120 or so years.
Yeah.
We've had so much change from one generation to the next, largely because of technology and our interconnectedness with each other, that we haven't really been able to let the dust settle with at any generation. Every single one of our generations from the turn of the last century has had a very different set of expectations on them than the last had. Whereas before, there were hundreds and hundreds of years where people kind of had similar expectations of themselves and one another. If you lived in 1540, there weren't very many inventors in 1540. Everybody knew that, we farm or we're soldiers or what have you. Those things were just, the world was a lot less complex. But our world has become insanely complex in the last 120 years. So, does that make sense?
So
All
I
right.
know you talk about generations. We're the millennial, and then there's some after us. But then, can you give the prior generations names and then a quick definition of who they were, what they did?
Yeah, I can.
And
I'll do my best.
what change started to happen? Because you said before a century ago, there wasn't really much change. So where the change started to happen and why?
Yeah, you could say that the Industrial Revolution really was the first. If you wanted to go back before that, you could say the Renaissance, but really the Industrial Revolution was the thing that got us where we are today. Right? The Industrial Revolution made things possible that weren't possible before that. Those things would be like building superstructures, skyscrapers, long bridges, railroads and railroad tracks. The engine, the combustion engine was, or the steam engine, was invented. So now you could pull really heavy loads of things over long distances. You could also travel from one place to another, and it wasn't on horseback, which was incredibly taxing. If you've ever ridden a horse for very long, imagine doing that, but trying to go across the entire continent, for instance, traveling from New York to California or something. I mean, it's just insane the amount of difficulty that was. But a train really minimized all that. It also, with the telegraph right around then, we started to become far more interconnected. Before that, literally, if you wanted to talk with somebody a city away, it may take a couple weeks because unless you paid a lot of money to have something like the Pony Express, which was mailmen on horseback take your letters specifically and go those long distances. But with the telegraph, we could send telegraphs and we could contact each other almost instantaneously. That generation right there around the 1900s,
Okay.
you could say 1900s to 1890s to 1910s, 20s-ish.
Okay.
That was the builder generation.
Okay.
If you want to give them a name and bracket them in, those are the builders.
Yeah.
And
that's when things started to, you could say, evolve.
Rapidly.
Okay.
Rapidly.
Yeah.
Because there was evolution before that,
Right.
right? There was expansion.
Right.
There was technological, but
A rapid evolve.
a rapid increase in those in the evolution of our society.
Yeah.
Okay. The other thing was, and you'll start to see this really take big effect in the next generation, is electricity gets invented.
Okay.
Remember, the Edison light bulb comes out, and I think it was like 1907-ish, if I remember right. Don't hold me to that, but it's right around there. So a lot of our big cities were built during this time. The Empire State Building, the Brooklyn Bridge.
Okay.
This is where big old New York kind of started to get built, right? Those pictures that you see, and maybe we'll show that on the screen if we can, of those men sitting on those long I-beams way up,
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
God knows how
Having
many
lunch
hundreds.
up there.
Yes, crazy stuff, right?
Yeah.
That OSHA would just, kill a construction company for today.
Right.
That was this generation that we're talking about here. This was also a generation of immigrants.
Okay.
There was a big famine that happened over in Europe, and you had a lot of people coming over during that time.
Okay.
And so you had a lot of expansion happening in our country, technologically, societally. The numbers of us started to increase, and then we had the Great War. This was the First World War, and it had a lot to do with setting up the dominoes that you're going to see start to kind of fall down as we talk about the next generations. The Great War, if you want to bracket it, you could say that the most important things to note are, number one, it put the United States on a global stage for the first time. And we really sucked up a lot of the wealth from Great Britain and from Europe, because we didn't enter the war until, the British and the French were just absolutely beaten down to almost nothing. They couldn't produce any more things like dynamite. They couldn't mine coal anymore. They couldn't do almost anything that a country needs to stay afloat. But the thing that the British Empire had was banks. Remember, they had a global empire for like 300 years that was insanely wealthy. They had Australia and India that were just sucking the wealth out of. But when that war happened, they needed bombs, bullets, and band-aids. And the only people that were industrialized enough at that point to provide them was the United States. And so they started shipping over their silver reserves and their gold reserves, and we in turn sent back
what they needed
for the war.
Yeah.
So that weakened Europe right there, but it sent us into a short kind of a boom into the 1920s. This is when you hear about the Roaring 20s.
Yeah.
So we had kind of like a little mini baby boom, which I'll talk about in a second with the actual baby boomers. But when all those men came back from war, the country was flush with money. There was a lot of new jobs to be had, and things were going pretty well. And so what happened was you had a kind of a big increase in the overall technology, the banking system, the numbers of people, the interconnectedness of the country. We really started to become a global power at this point. We also started to develop technologies at a really rapid pace. This is
almost like our society started functioning like
everything before this generation. Everything before this generation was like what you thought of was like cowboys and Indians.
Right.
Like literally.
Right.
We were still fighting Indian wars right up into when we were fighting the Apaches right up into the real early 1900s. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Right? But think about it like this. Like all these things that we take for granted, like electricity,
Yeah.
this happened during this time. Medicines for the first time were really getting produced in a big way. Penicillin came out in the early 1900s, right around when the Great War came out. And a bunch of other pharmaceuticals. This is when we started to get like real scientific medicine. These are things that we just kind of hold for granted today.
Yeah.
But those guys back then, they were kind of inventing the practices that we see today. They didn't have those things before that generation. Right. So their children, next generation, this one's really important. We call them the golden or the greatest generation.
Yeah.
Now, these guys, if you want to bracket them in, their shared history really revolves around World War II.
Okay.
When we talk about the last generation of builders, it's important to note that the Roaring Twenties ended in a Great Depression.
Okay.
Largely because the banking system of Europe was all thrown out of whack because of World War I.
Okay.
A lot of the banks ended up sending all of their money to New York. And instead of London being the big global hub, the United States really did for economic resource. And it sent everything really into a bad place. This is where you get the Dust Bowl. This is where you get the Bonnie and Clyde era.
Yeah.
The bank robberies, the gangster era, all that stuff, right? This is also the time right in there where you can think about prohibition happening, and you're having the bootleggers, and this is during
Is
that
this
time.
when the Texas Rangers came about too?
No, they came about back in the early 1800s and the 1830s,
Okay.
right? But they really hit their kind of stride, I guess you could say. They really got professionalized during this time.
Okay.
In fact, it was a couple Texas Rangers that killed Bonnie and Clyde,
Yeah, I was
hunted
going to
them
say
down.
that because we recently visited the Texas Museum in Waco, and we were reading about that, and that was one of the kids' pretty much favorite place that we've been to so
It's neat.
far.
It's a neat place. And so they were kind of like really formalized to fight the bank robber kind of gangster groups that were out. This is also when the FBI was formed around this same want to get a hold of violent crime.
Okay.
And the greatest generation then was born in that 1920s, 1930s era.
Okay.
And then we had the resurgence of war in Europe.
Okay.
This was the one that we really remember. Okay. We have a hard time remembering World War I.
Yeah.
But all of us, even millennials today, we all know somebody, it's usually a grandparent or a great this or that fought in World War II. Yeah. We lost, I think it was 230,000 soldiers in that war. So we lost about a generation worth of people.
Yeah.
It was a very bloody, hard war.
Yeah.
But it's important to note that when we got into the war, after we were attacked in Pearl Harbor, the whole country was mobilized on what they call a wartime economy, or on a war footing.
Okay.
Every able-bodied man, and that meant just about stinking every single male, was drafted immediately into the United States military. A lot of them, just enlisted, but everybody else that didn't, you got drafted because we needed every man. The problem was that to make bombs and bandages and bullets and boots and things like that, you've got to have factories running.
Yeah.
But all the able-bodied men,
Right.
and like I said, if you were like even mildly able-bodied, if you could peel potatoes, they could use you, and you were going, man.
Right.
There was nobody to run these factories.
Right. That were men. Right.
But what did they find?
The women.
The women.
Yeah.
This is a big thing in our country's history. I can't emphasize it enough, and I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I almost can't I almost can't emphasize it enough.
Yeah.
This is when women, for the first time, really got the understanding, and society started to approve
Yeah.
of women developing skills and working outside the home.
Yeah.
So, well, what does that have to do with how millennials see things today? Well, a lot of millennials believe that, and I believe rightfully so, that women should be equally trained in school, in the workplace. They should be allowed equal pay and opportunity, and all those things I believe are good. But there was some bad things that came along with it as secondary and tertiary consequences.
Yeah.
One of those things was, now that women had the ability to go and work outside the home, if they had a husband that they were disapproving of, which we all know women at some point.
Yeah.
I mean, today we have 80% of the divorces are initiated by
Right.
the
Right.
female, by the woman. And so females are typically the ones that are going to get fed up with whatever it is that their man is doing, and they're going to look other places. Again, this is painting with a very broad brush, but when that happened, it gave women the ability to no longer need the provision, the strength, the self-sacrifice of a husband. They could go largely do it themselves.
Yeah. This is why
Uh-huh.
I think that it's important to note this part right here in history, because I don't believe that the majority of the millennial women right now really understand why women worked outside of the home. I really think that women started to work outside of the home not because they said, I want to be able to, and I want to show that I'm capable. I think they started to work outside of the home because it came out of a necessity.
Yeah, there was a need
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. Not just of a want.
But it
They
turned
were willing
into
to.
a one. It turned into a tool,
Yeah.
right? And women, rightfully so, they took advantage of those new
But
opportunities.
now I feel like millennial women feel entitled to saying, I want to work outside of the home and you can't tell me any different. I can
Sure.
provide, I can do it, I don't need you. There's an entitlement that has
And the
come about
millennial
that.
in me, you know, like I said a minute ago, I kind of hold those things to be true. I do think that women should have opportunity
Yeah.
and equal pay for equal
Yeah.
work, and as much as is possible,
Right.
and equal education.
Yeah.
However, the problem that we get into is the biology.
Yeah.
Right? We're wired, we know this, genetically, in our DNA, to do certain things for certain reasons.
Yeah.
And our bodies have become very well tuned to making sure that we survive. Now, how have we survived? A couple of those ways are we reproduce, and we do that in largely monogamous, nuclear family
Yeah.
groups, and that has worked for us for a very long time. Now, it's important to note that it wasn't always so.
Yeah.
And we have to kind of reconcile with that, I
Yeah.
think. Otherwise, it's almost like we're fighting against nature itself.
Yeah.
Like, we do have some programming. We have some, like, software in us.
Yeah.
We're kind of like a computer, it seems like. And if you toy around and put software on that computer, tell that computer to do something that it wasn't tooled to do,
Yeah.
well, you're going to have problems with the thing
Yeah.
because it's inherently not made to
Yeah.
do that thing that you're trying to get out of it.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that I'm saying that women shouldn't, you know, be and do all those things that I listed
Yeah.
a second ago, but it
It's
does mean,
accepting. It's accepting that because of the will to be something they weren't, it came out of a necessity.
it did.
And that's what needs to be accepted.
If I hear you properly, which I may not, it sounds to me like that necessity is something that you're wanting to kind of key in on a little bit.
Right.
I wonder if it's because you're thinking somewhere that women today think that working outside the home and being independent and not needing the help or the direction of a male partner, of a husband, those are all things that are a societal good and
They wear
not
it like a badge of honor, which
Okay.
I don't believe that it should be worn as such, where you're independent and you don't need a man and you can take on this world on your own.
Okay.
Because that's what I feel like doesn't produce the best success in society.
Sure.
You need to do it the way that we've been doing it for so long.
Or at least in some degree, right? We can't just like cut away all of our ties and all of our moorings.
Because you said that marriage or families have been around for very long. So when something has been around for very long, we've talked about this, is there's some profound thing about it.
There's a utility to it.
Yeah.
There's a reason why it's
been around for so long and it has worked.
and it's survived, right?
Worked, yeah.
Now, why isn't it surviving? That's kind of what we're talking about right now. Why is it believed that it doesn't, that these things, these traditional values, these things don't need to survive and they can be done away with?
Right.
Well, it comes from exactly what we're talking about here. So, when the men came back from World War II, a lot of strong women working in these families, they built us the ships and they built us the boots, and the families were flush with money now because we did the same thing, but round two to Europe, we sucked the rest of everything the French and British banks had right out of them in order to,
I commend those women that did it and made it happen.
Oh we would have probably lost the war without them, for sure.
But see, I think that's something to key into as well, is that the women stepped up out of a necessity to help bring success to what was going downhill.
Seems to me that Rosie the Riveter, you know who I'm talking about, that was somebody that was needed. To help.
Yes, to make something better.
Yes. And so it was almost like tapping into that feminine helpmate.
Nurturer, caretaker.
But they're caring for the whole of the society in an industrial way.
Yes.
The problem is that tough chick took on a new life.
It was misinterpreted.
Yes.
Very, very taking out of context, if you want to call it like that.
No, I think that you're right, because if you watch like third and fourth wave feminists today and watch the stuff that they post, you'll see that they go all the way back to this Rosie Riveter. They'll use this as the tough chick, the almost like the matriarch that brought us out of oppression.
To endorse their way of thinking right now.
Yeah, but almost like like an apostle or something like that. She was the one that brought us out of oppression under the foot of the patriarchy.
What gets really missed is the why. Why did she do that? She did that because there was a need for it. There was a need of help, a cry of help of the society that she had to step into, and you could say she led it.
Yeah, she did it. She did it, man. So
that is to honor, but don't neglect the why.
Yeah, I think that's important. And I like how you put that there. So when the men got back, I kind of talked about what they were running into when they got back. A lot of money. We're now out of the Great Depression. We've taken a second big installment of European money and thrown it into New York. Our stock market was doing incredible. Our industries were booming because, I mean, gosh, we built these factories that could turn out like a Liberty cruiser ship in 24 hours time. We had this thing running. And our technology during World War II, boom, it increased. This is when the nuclear bomb came out and nuclear energy came out with the Manhattan Project. This is when air flight, air power. This was the first war where air power was really a thing. I mean, the war you could almost say was won and lost based off of a country's air power.
Well, yeah.
And that meant that passenger flights and communication, all these things were starting to change rapidly again, just like they did kind of in the First World War and kind of right around there with the railroad and all that. Yeah. And we've got this, it hasn't even been 40 years from when people were traveling on coal steam engine trains across the Great Plains of the West. And we have bank robbers in the Dust Bowl, just these... All of a sudden, we've got Pan Am and we've got these other airlines that are now flying passengers intercontinentally, and we've got this connectedness. We start to see globalization in these global trade routes that we've never seen before, and quick. And our colleges exploded. We've always had good colleges in the United States, all the way back from before the founding. We had good colleges, but man, we got a bunch of them right around this time. Okay. And what that did was that opened up kind of a new market in the United States, wherein before that time, most people that went to university were studying things like engineering or, medicine, or they were generally wealthy, well-off, or very, very smart people that were going to university. Now we had a bunch of universities, and we said, hey, the way that we're going to increase this momentum that we got going is we're going to educate everybody in our whole society. Man, woman, child, we changed our educational structure all the way up and kind of federalized it and put that into the hands of big government. It was no longer on a local level. It turned in to a state and a federal level. We got federal police forces with the FBI that are now getting strong and increasing their power, and we're starting to gel as a country, whereas before we were a conglomeration of states. Remember, it was only in the 1860s that we had, so that was 40 years before where we started this story. Only 40 years, only one person before where we started this big rapid change was the Civil War in the United States. So you could almost say in the last 160 years, we've gone from Civil War, right, to we're trying to put people on Mars now. That's a big jump in 140 years. That's only like, if you think about it, somebody can live 80 years. That's only like 2 people back. Right? Okay, maybe they only lived to 50. That's only like 3 people back.
Right.
And so we've been moving at a rapid click. Now, this all has implications on how society is viewing itself. What we're seeing as social norms. We're starting to break away from some of those because now we've got another big thing is during the Greatest Generation, we started to get appliances. So whereas before, home life was hard and hot.
Right.
Well, women were now able to become more educated, and men too for that reason, because you had things like automatic log splitters, and you had things like really high-powered industrial machines for farming and for cotton production. And also, you had things like washing machines.
I was going to say that. No more hand washing.
That was a huge time expenditure for any woman in a family. We're talking that was 1 to 2 days worth of work a week, they say. I don't know if that's true, but man, if it is, that's a bunch of work. That's a bunch of work. And so
all of these machinery, appliances, they cut the time of labor and manual work dramatically.
And
they cut it down. And
because manual work was no longer something that was done manually, right? In a muscular way. Right? Men started to become less and less a necessity in a household, if you think about it. Whereas before, men were necessary to do things like fight the Indians off of the homestead and break the horses, right? I don't know about
Chop
you.
the wood.
Chop the wood.
Yeah.
Are you going to go break a horse? Are you
No,
going to get on that?
thanks.
Okay. There's not many women that would.
Just here to expose myself, I've never cut the grass.
Okay.
I've never pushed a lawnmower.
Okay.
I've never even ridden on a lawnmower.
Okay.
I've never cut the grass.
Yes.
So I would not be breaking a horse back
So
then.
you're definitely a millennial woman then, because
I've taken
millennial
advantage of all the appliances that have been created.
Absolutely you have. But that teaches us something. That informs us about how we think.
Yeah.
And this is where it came from.
Now, I don't mind if I would have to hand wash, or if I would have to. I
You
don't
think you don't mind?
I don't mind. I mean, I
Okay.
kind of do that with baby clothes right now. Is that I have to hand wash it.
You have some really, really nice washing machines though.
I do.
Really, like
I do.
the biggest residential washing machines that one can buy.
But even then, I don't trust them. I feel like I have to hand wash some of the baby clothes. So
Okay.
I'm not against manual labor, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Outdoor manual labor, that's up to you.
Right. So anyways, it's important to note the big theme of that part right there was men are getting less and less necessary in the home.
Right.
Less necessary for the bringing in the funds
Yeah.
for the family. Less necessary for the
Physical labor.
physical labor
Yeah.
for the homestead, because things were just getting easier.
Yeah.
And you could also say less necessary for the raising of the children, because we started to have this really concise, federalized school system
Yeah.
that was really being pushed. And so we started to kind of groom our children as a country in these organized schools. And so men became, in so many different ways, less and less necessary,
Yeah.
we thought.
Right.
Okay. The next generation comes out of this greatest generation. They are the boomers. The boomers, we call the boomers, if you don't know, because they were a baby boom that happened from a bunch of really happy, very lonely dudes coming back from World War II, right?
Yeah.
They made it out. You
Yeah.
were one of the lucky ones, and they all saw horrific stuff.
Right.
The stories of ships going down and men being eaten for days by sharks at night in the Coral Sea, or the Battle of the Bulge as bombs are exploding and sending wood shards of pine raining down into the foxholes, or the other
Yeah.
million horrible things
Yeah.
that these men went through. They
Yeah.
got back. They had a good economy. They had good jobs. They had women that were wanting to work outside the home and help in new ways. And they started getting busy. And we see the biggest generation, the largest, most numerous generation that our country has ever produced come right out of that.
Yeah.
They're probably, arguably, the most important generation of the last 120 years.
Why is that? And what would that be in relation to us right now?
Okay, the baby boomers are going to be somewhat like our parents.
Okay.
Would be like the late baby boomers. Remember,
Okay.
these generations, they're not cut and dried. They
overlap.
kind of, there's some
Yeah.
mush in between there. But like my parents are very late baby boomers. Yours kind of are too. They would be some of our grandparents. All of the Zoomers, so like the generation after ours, that's in like high school right now,
Okay.
that generation, their grandparents are late boomers.
Okay.
The boomers have controlled our country and put us on the map in a global way like no other generation has done. We don't know exactly why or how, but there are some key factors in it.
Okay.
Number one, it goes back to their numbers. They were extremely numerous.
Okay.
They were born into a very, very good economy,
Right.
which set them up to also engage in a very successful, organized education system,
Yeah.
which allowed them to then be very marketable to the new industrial revolution,
Okay.
which was the technological or the PC revolution.
Okay.
So
some of these boomers,
Yep.
famous names, who would they be?
Oh gosh, there's a million of them. Like Steve Jobs,
Okay. Bill Gates.
Bill Gates, absolutely. So these are some guys that you think of as boomers. A lot of famous actors. Remember Hollywood got big during this time. 60s,
Because
70s, 80s.
the economy was good.
Color film came out.
Yeah.
Remember, these are all
Okay.
technologies,
Yeah.
right? Color film came out. Movies started to become very regular. Movie houses started to pop up.
Okay. So what year is this?
This is the boomers were born in the 50s
Okay.
and the 60s,
Okay.
raised in the 60s and 70s,
Okay.
and came of age in the 80s.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
like
that makes sense.
one of the things that you started to have that was interesting when the Greatest Generation came back, they started to become a little bit more nominal with their faith.
Okay.
And this really bled over into the boomers in a big way. The educational system, especially the universities, started to be infiltrated, we believe, largely by communist ideology. Remember, this is the era of the Cold War right here,
Yeah.
right? As soon as World War II stopped, boom, we were in the Cold War with Russia, and we were in a war of ideology, and they were very successful at getting their ideology into our universities.
Okay.
So, you think about like the shooting that happened at UC Berkeley. That shooting was done on UC Berkeley students back in the 60s, if I remember correctly. I think it was 67? Right around there, 67, between 67 and 73. I'm almost positive. But this is where the radicals were starting to come out. The anti-government, the anti-big America, the anti-war machine, the anti-capitalist ideology was starting to be taught into the boomer generation through the universities.
Okay.
That was then put out through our news media.
Okay. Because of technology.
Because of technology, and this stuff was propagated quickly, right?
Okay.
Also, you could print books a lot faster and produce these things because we had industry that was really successful at producing stuff really fast and cheaply. That's what our economy started to become tooled towards. Production, consumerism, and it drove a lot of success in our country. But it monetarily, but it also had some problems, just like everything else has secondary
it had issues in the society, but it had good effects monetarily.
Yes,
Yeah.
just like everything does.
Yeah.
It has goods and bads, ups and downs. So the faith structure of the boomers started to get weakened from several different directions. They really seemed to lose faith, and they ended up kind of selling their soul. Because remember, this is also where the hippies came from.
I was going to say that. That's every time you
Free
talk
love.
about this generation.
Yeah.
Yep. The peace and love.
Yep. Peace and love, man. No war, anti-war movement.
Yep. Because they came from parents that had just been through
two wars.
Yeah.
Yep. World War II and the Korean War, which was a forgotten war, which was also pretty damaging.
Yeah,
you know.
I've heard about it.
But then they were in the Cold War, and they were under this anxiety of being wiped off the face of the earth. They came up with this doctrine. It was called MAD. To be mad means to be insane. And this thing really was insane. It was called mutually assured destruction. And so this was where the anti-war, man, we don't want a war of ideologies. We'd rather all just kind of be communal and live together. And I'm not sure exactly when that changed, but you can start to see it change big time at the middle to end of the Vietnam War and the assassination of JFK.
Okay.
JFK was the boomers' president, you could say. He was their hope and their faith to making a country that was above these old ways of doing business internationally.
Okay.
And he got assassinated. And it's almost like the faith of the boomers just left.
Was crushed.
And they said, we're no longer going to try to gain power through marches. we're going to go into the marketplace and make so much friggin' money that you will never be able to tell us what to do again. Yeah. And they kind of sold their souls to business.
Yeah.
Which is why we have incredible businesses today.
Yeah.
And why we're leaders in almost every technology that exists.
Yeah.
But again, it had bad consequences.
In society. Yeah.
I think the biggest of those bad consequences was that now that you had households that were going after money, bigger house, bigger car, bigger boat, consumerism, vacations. Well, you a lot of times needed two people in order to keep up that type of lifestyle, or to get that upward trajectory at least.
Right.
So what you started to have was a lack of parenting we now see.
Yeah.
This is where the Xers came about. The Xers won't be written about very much in historical books.
Xers are also called the latchkey kids.
Yes, that's my more favorite term for that generation. And let me explain why. When you have both of the parents out working a 9 to 5, but the boomers typically didn't work 9 to 5. They worked as many overtime hours as they possibly could. This is when beepers came about. Specifically, beepers got big because of people being on call. I'm not saying beepers, were this huge thing, but it just kind of shows the technology. If you follow the technology, you can follow where the society was trying to go.
Right.
And it was trying to go towards, get me as many hours in this place as I possibly can, so I can make as much money as I possibly can, and become as rich as I possibly can, and empowered because of it.
Yep.
And
that's how these beepers are treated. If it beeped, emergency.
Yeah, I mean, my parents would leave like at 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning at the ring of a beeper, and they would keep that thing next to them all the time because they would get paid just for having the beeper on. They would be just on call. They'd be at home, but they'd have that beeper. But man, if that thing went off, boy, they were going 45-minute trip into the hospital, And I thank my parents for doing that because they really set a stage for me to,
have
become
a good work ethic.
And become successful in life,
My dad was the same way. I remember the beeper with my dad.
Yes. Yeah. So these guys worked hard.
Yeah.
And I kind of call millennials, the princes of kings, because we're really kind of like the richest. We're the offspring of the richest generation that's really ever existed.
Right.
But back to the Xers, the latchkeyers. When you have those, like I was saying, those both parents that are constantly working.
Right.
They weren't home. This is where like TV dinners started to become really big, and evening television, MTV. It was very common for boomers to also only have maybe 1 or 2 kids. The birth rate of the boomers dropped off pretty dramatically.
Yeah.
Because they
started
were
working.
Because they
wanted to work.
They weren't on the farm. We were all going off the farm. When you're on the farm, dude, you want to bang out some babies because that's a workforce for you as soon as they start to come of age.
Yeah.
You need people to milk them
family
cows.
business.
It's a family business.
Yeah.
But when you're working in a hospital or as an engineer in a factory or whatever you're doing, it's so much more structured that you can't have children around. Children
you don't need as many hands.
You just don't.
Yeah.
You just don't. Children now started to become more of a luxury good than they did a necessity.
Exactly, yeah.
And the problem is that the boomers had children based off of family values that they were trying to live up to, but everything started to fall apart in their generation. They became extremely godless. They started to cut the moorings of their social structures.
Yeah.
And this is where you start to see postmodernism, which you could say, what is postmodernism? Postmodernism is like saying there is no truth but what's true to you, right?
Yeah.
So you read a book, I read the book, I say, oh, it's good to climb trees, and you read the book.
It's just so goofy to me.
It is goofy.
Yeah.
It's a great principle for like studying literature in university, but it's not a great principle to live by.
To live life.
No.
Yeah, to live
it's
life.
really bad.
That's where I believe it's really goofy.
Yes.
It's not applied to apply it to life.
Yeah.
It's made for literature.
Well, it's It's made as a way to think through, like you said, literature or different types of philosophy, etc. And those things are useful to take yourself outside.
Like literature or philosophy have many facets. So that's where that type of concept would make sense.
Yeah, what I'm looking at is true, and what you're kind of seeing from the other direction over here based on your life experience, etc. That is also true. Right. It is a diamond that has many sides. Yeah. All of it is the diamond. Yeah. That's a postmodernistic worldview.
Doesn't work for life.
Doesn't work when you're going to work and raising family.
Yeah, it don't.
You need to have some actual things that you believe in, or else you just don't have anything to stand on. It's like trying to build a house on sand.
Yep.
So the latchkeyers, they got that name when they would come home and their parents wouldn't be there because their parents were off working. Yeah. They're also called the depressed generation. This is the generation where emo started to come around, and goth. Yeah. Goth was kind of probably more latchkeyers Xers than emo. Emo started to come around kind of more in our generation, but really emo were just latchkeyers that were raised by later on boomers. Same feeling of depression and lack of self-worth, lack of identity and understanding who they were and where they came from and who their family was.
And see, I think this is where it starts to break because
big time.
Because the parents are the ones that instill identity and purpose
absolutely
and history into
and it's always been
children.
Like that.
It has.
It's always been like that.
And so taking that away just made the missing link.
And even more so, it took out a link. You now had a missing link. Like the keystone was taken out of a person's growth and development in their identity. Right. The other thing that we didn't understand really is how pivotal fathers were and we still don't really quite understand this. There's some really interesting books out there, but it's an incredible book called The Boy Crisis, and it talks about the necessity of men or the effects of men in the household or out of the household, right? It kind of plays these two things. Like 85% of people that are in prison come from fatherless homes. I think it's like 80 or 90% of rapes are committed by fatherless people. People that abuse women are like 70% fatherless homes. We didn't really realize that. I mean, if you think about on the female side, strippers are they famously have daddy issues, right? Women without fathers, somehow it's like, for some reason, we don't know why, our fathers give us, and biblically, I think that we can kind of glean some truths, but societally, when you scoop the Bible away,
when you're godless,
we really don't understand why fathers impute such identity, but without fathers, for whatever reason, females do not seem to have that thing in them that impugns identity into young humans.
Right, that affirms it.
Yes.
Yeah, there's no affirmation in their identity without a father.
Yes. Yeah. And that's a big subject that I'm passionate about, and we could maybe one day go into a whole bunch more of that if anybody's interested.
Right, which I really believe that identity in children will cause less break in families when they get older.
Oh,
I really think that the kids will not feel that they have to leave their family in order to go find who they are. Yeah. I hate that phrase. I hate that kids say that phrase when they turn 18. See you later. I'm going to go find who I am. It's like, whoa, you were supposed to do that all these 18 years that you were here in this house.
That's another interesting thing that I didn't think of, but that is very true. When I was over in Egypt a few years ago, I heard one of the missionaries from the United States. She was talking to one of the wives of the missionaries there in Egypt. Okay. And she was talking about how it's very common for young men and women in an American family to leave and go off to university and go and work in another city or state. And it was very interesting to me because that Egyptian woman, who was also a millennial, if you were to put us in age group, right? She was shocked. Just shocked And I don't know how she was so shocked because they have the internet there in Egypt. She really didn't understand that was something that anybody she couldn't conceptualize it. And so in our country, we got very used to, we're just going to go out and we're going to reinvent the wheel and we're going to start a brand new identity all by ourselves. We're going to figure out who we are. When before it was our tribe and our family and our state and our country and our God that all gave us a sense of
everything
who
linked.
we were.
And it should still link. But because of this era right here that we're currently talking about, they created the missing link.
Yeah, these keystones started to be taken out, and we've now got an archway that is largely caving in. We're in some real trouble societally. The latchgears, they also started to become what you could call, like, this is where grunge music, like I was talking about, came about. This is the depressed generation. You don't have parents, you don't have good parents, you get a depressed generation. The children of the latchgears then, the latchgears did go out, they did have children, they had very high divorce rates. And I remember when I was a child, I mean, it seemed like everybody was in a divorced home, you know? And my parents have stayed together, but both of my parents had a divorce before they got together. These things were very common, and it was very common with the latchgears because they didn't have real good identity. They weren't able to bond with others real well, it seems like. When you don't have real, feminine women that are willing to walk in a feminine role and masculine men that are willing to work in a masculine role, and both of them willing to self-sacrifice, all of these things are taught through years and years and years and years of grooming of children, and the latchgears didn't have it. So they were depressed. They grew up without their parents.
Lack of identity. Lack of understanding of how men and women should be playing their roles. Correctly. Not just because society says so. It's way back to how men and women really were created. So there's those two things that are lacking in this generation. So therefore, the millennial kids don't really even know where they came from. Why things are the way that they are.
The Xers were also the first truly godless generation. This is
where traditions or traditional things started started to go away. In a big way. In a real big way. Started to get buried. And we're trying to dig it out right now.
This is where atheism also got a real big foothold in society, was with this generation. They're very intellectual. They were the kids of the people that were really building this technological revolution that we now are experiencing. And pretty savvy. Almost all of them, I say almost all of them, a very large percentage of them were educated at a very high level. Most of them have at least some college education, which if you put that across, if you put that into a scale across all people in a certain age group across the world, that's a very rare thing.
So this seems to make sense. It's making sense a little bit more why millennials are thinking so differently. Right. But now explain to me millennials. We have missing links as to why they don't believe some of the things that are traditional.
Millennials are all screwed up. We're the
most generation that has been promoted to, has been sold to because of technology and how big businesses have been created and have been working in our society.
So millennials are very skeptical.
Yes.
Millennials are largely the people that fought the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. We saw, many of us remember seeing the towers fall.
Right. That was our big thing in this generation.
We remember the Patriot Act starting to rev up. This is all technology. This is where smartphones are starting to be created, and we're really getting connected now. This is the early 2000s. This is where MySpace was coming around and messenger systems, and we're really, really getting technologically integrated. We're getting fast internet now. Remember, the internet came about in a big way in the 90s. That changed everything. And the and the latchkeyers just started to tap in to the internet, the early internet. The latchkeyers, this, hackers. When you think about hackers, the old school hackers were latchkeyers.
Yeah, it would make sense. They were at home a lot without any parental vision.
Exactly right. No, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's good.
No parental supervision, and at home a lot with technology.
Yep.
And
bad things happen. Yes. Very little good that can happen from that. Nobody's reading the encyclopedia, if you know what I mean. Right? Okay, where did we leave off? Kind of like we're going towards the millennials now. So
why are they thinking so different? Because there has some missing links. They don't have understanding.
Yeah, so things really degraded in our millennial generation, and it picked up speed. So the lack of identity that the latchkeyers had, the depression that they had, right? The greed that the boomers had, and the tough work ethic, and the willingness to self-sacrifice for the big and the better, right?
The things happening that made us very skeptical, and things had to happen with technology.
Those things that I just mentioned all like trickled down. Those were all the things that destroyed or started to degrade the structure of belief for these different generations. But they handed these things down, and it really, the degradation seemed to really pick up speed when it got to our generation. I think millennials are bracketed in by the word skeptical. We're skeptical of faith. We're skeptical of our government. We're the most, like you mentioned, most marketed to people that have ever walked the face of the earth. From small children, we were given commercial after commercial after commercial. It's very interesting. A millennial can spot a scam from a mile away. We can just boom, right? We grew up in the age of scammers. But if you ask like our grandparents, my grandma still believes crazy stuff about
But this is where
crazy
the
political
boring
things.
Movies started to come out.
Sure.
Which I really enjoyed. What else started to come out like that?
In millennials?
Yeah.
Oh gosh. Well, what do you mean by the Bourne series? Like, did that have some type of significance to you, do you think?
Yeah, the technology.
This
is going on behind the scenes.
Yeah.
The backstabbing.
This is where Edward Snowden came out and started to reveal what was really going on under the auspice of the Patriot Act and the spying that was happening at an insane level, and the FOIA courts that were basically giving rubber stamp warrants to be able to spy on American citizens and do what's called an unmasking of their identity on documents that were being collected. And so we basically grew up under the first wave of the real nanny state. With our phones, we know, we just absolutely have evidence of it now that they're recording everything that people are saying. There's people that get arrested all the time now for there was one case recently that I read about, if I remember the details correctly, that his wife was murdered, and they went back on his Alexa and somehow heard everything that he said in this kind of like schemy plan at some point, and ended up indicting him because of that. Well, okay, that's never happened before.
Right.
So this is a new thing.
Yeah.
We feel, as millennials, we feel out of power. The millennials are just now starting to get any political footholds. We've got some congressmen, we've got a couple senators, almost no latchkeyers. For whatever reason, the Xers, the latchkeyers, never got a foothold, never got a grasp on the reins of power of our government. Those things are all still controlled tight-fistedly by the boomers.
Yeah.
There's a reason why, like Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, she's 83 years old. Joe Biden, our president, is over 80 years, I think he's 80 this year, 81. That's really getting up there, you know? Gosh, I think my granddad died at like 84 or something like that. And I think the average life expectancy of an American, I think, is like 77. So these people are like running the country on borrowed time, kind of, if you think about it like that. And millennials, we're just different. We're just really, really different. All of these things have trickled down to us that have given us very little that says this or that is true. We don't believe in our country anymore because it lied to us. Yeah. It told us that there was weapons of mass destruction, and it sent off all of our cousins and brothers and sisters off to wars in far out places, and they spilled their blood, and they came back and their brains are all scrambled from IEDs and different types of stress and these burn pits and all this horrible stuff that happens during war, all under the original pretense that, oh, there's weapons of mass destruction there that ended up never being found. Yeah. We're being spied on all the time by that same untrustworthy government. So then that just goes down
to the parenting being a little different. It's like, well, I'm going to protect my kids and the way that I do things because I can't trust anything else. I can't trust government. I can't trust my neighbor. I can't trust
media got bit.
Like,
media
I can't
got
trust
bit. Yep.
Anything.
Can't trust media.
So I'm going to keep them close, and I'm going to do what I feel is best for them.
Yes.
Right? So that kind of answers my question as to why millennials are so different and they do things different. But I think what we should get into is, I'm a millennial, but I still feel different than the majority of the millennials.
Yes.
I have some tendencies of the skepticism and let me do things how I think is best.
My way, the helicopter-y type parenting of that.
Right, because of that. So I believe that we should get into as to why we're different.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that'll be a fun conversation. Let me mention one little thing, kind of as I think we're wrapping up here. Yeah. When the latchkeyers had kids, they protected them in a way, and they coddled them in a way that probably no other people have ever really experienced on Earth.
That's where the helicoptering came in.
Absolutely. Yeah. But why? They did that because they were depressed.
They lacked something, and they didn't want their kids to lack in that.
That's what it was.
Which is the parent and the emotional connection.
They wanted to be there as parents. Right. They wanted to protect them. They didn't want them to. Yes, this is where soccer moms started to come about.
Because they were neglected. Is what they felt.
That they were never going to. They were never going to neglect a child.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, that some of that has trickled down to us, right? Like the reason that I've wanted to have 4 is because I grew up as basically an only child, and I didn't want that alone, depressed.
That's why we had our first 2 back to back, so that they would have a buddy to grow up.
Yeah,
with. I'm the third child, but I'm the youngest. I agree with that too, because I have a brother that's 10 years older than me, and I have another brother that's 7. So I kind of grew up by myself till I got a certain age and I could relate to them, but I didn't have anyone that I could grow up as a buddy.
Yeah.
I had cousins. I had lots of cousins.
Yeah.
But at home, I remember playing.
I think the thing that saved you, though, is you had a stay-at-home mom.
Yeah, I think that I had the connection, and I had my emotional social interaction fulfilled. And I think that's another break in how kids are being raised today with parents working outside the home.
Sure.
I don't think they realize that children really need an emotional connection with a parent, preferably both.
Yeah.
But they need a certain amount of interaction so that they don't grow up feeling like their needs aren't being met.
30 years ago,
in other words, whiny kids.
Sure. 30 years ago, it was only the Christian right. Those were the only people that were really preaching these type of things. And so when Christianity started to become dismembered, well, those type of things were seen as being part of, that's that that's that ancient belief system. That's that stupid belief system that doesn't really exist or have any real meaning to my life, because we're in a post-Christian society. We don't need those structures anymore. And now things have gotten so bad that you're just now seeing both scientists and normies talking about how necessary it is to have a mother and father in the home there regularly.
To produce a healthy individual in society.
Yes. Otherwise, we have the science. The science is it's settled. And this is part of why it's starting to be talked about in a little bit more, with a little bit more freedom.
Emphasis.
Well, you don't have to sound like a Bible thumper to say that, hey, you should be in a monogamous relationship.
Like, it's not just
you should not get divorced. In religion. Intellectually honest scientists are starting to say, hey man, we're having real problems with mental health. We're having real problems with crime. We're having real problems with identity. And it all stems back to, we can almost assuredly stem it back to the grooming of that children, especially in their tender years, between the ages of 1 and 5.
If something's been around for so long and it has worked,
yes,
and now it's been broken, and now not just religious people or the Bible is saying that we're doing something wrong, science is saying we're doing something wrong too.
Yes.
So if all of those umbrellas, you could call them, are saying something is wrong when people aren't doing households between a husband and a wife, between marriage.
That marriage staying together, that's very important for the raising of children and for society, for the functioning of society. Remember, society starts with the individual. We think that society starts with the society, and then the society raises productive individuals. It really doesn't. We're starting to figure out you have to have productive individuals in order to raise well-grounded, functioning humans with a good sense of all these things that we've been mentioning, including identity and self-worth and mental health and ability to study, etc.
It seems to make sense.
It makes sense.
So this almost kind of makes me feel like I'm not so different.
Okay.
Like, feel good about not being so different.
Oh, you don't feel bad about being different.
Yeah. So this kind of helps that feeling a little bit, because again, I know that my kids, the way that we're raising them, or the way that we are implementing these traditional values and the reasons why, they're gonna be asked, why are you so different? Why do you do things differently? Yeah. And I want them to have good foundational truths to back them up.
Sure.
To back up the things that they do differently.
Yeah.
And I think, like I've mentioned before, the innocence that is in humanity from when they're just born. Okay. Right? It's to be protected. It's a responsibility of a parent in a household to protect that innocence.
Every fallacy or heresy of today comes from a good truth of yesterday that's been warped. And so that innocence, that protection that needs to happen. The latchkeyers went whole hog in on that for their children, and then they produced the millennials, which is like the snowflake generation. We're scared of everything, and we need safe rooms and cry rooms and teddy bears. And seriously, and we're having mental health days. I'm protecting my mental health, and that it's almost like a badge of honor if you have something mentally wrong with you now. And it's produced through excess coddling. It's produced really low functioning humans. We're starting to see an influx of what they call like boomerang kids. Is what they're being called, which is people that, graduate high school, they go out to university, they get a job, they hook up with a girl or a boy, the things don't work out, the job spirals out of control, they can't pay their rent, they can't
So they come back.
and they're right back living with their parents at
Yeah.
35.
Yeah.
That's extremely common, apparently. Now, there's some other things, right? Our economy has been a little bit difficult for
Yeah.
individuals to buy houses and
Yeah,
to
yeah.
go off on their own. So some of that
Yeah.
is interconnected
Yeah.
there. But the principle, I think, remains, which is if you make soft people, they will have a hard time dealing with the not so soft realities of the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a big part of millennials' screwed upness.
Yeah.
All the corners have to be rounded. Everything has to be padded and nerfed.
Yeah.
And protected and safe.
Yeah.
It even talks about in the Bible how in the end times, and I'm not saying necessarily that this is the end times, but it's kind of weird. It talks about social degradation in the end times,
Yeah.
and how the people were willing to give up their freedoms and their power under the want for, it says that they screamed out peace and safety,
Yeah.
peace
Soft
and safety.
people, describing soft people.
Soft people. You saw this. You saw this during COVID a lot
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
Is people were just absolutely terrified of something that was almost 100% survivable. It was only a 0.03% kill rate on that, which killed a lot of people. I think.
Yeah.
Gosh, I think we're up to a million people in the United States. That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
Is it that high? I think it may be. But nevertheless, that's important. But there's 370 million of us left. And we shut down the entire country. We didn't let people do anything from go to church to grocery shop, go to the gym,
But I
anything.
think there is a balance in the protecting of the innocence with the kid.
Okay.
There is a balance in saying, okay,
Sure.
like you said, there's truth. And that's what I'm after, is teaching the next generation and the generation after the truth of where we came from and who we are and why we believe what we believe with good truth. Not just what's true to me, maybe different what's true to you, not that type of truth.
No, but some good foundation stones for them to
foundational truths.
set
Because
themselves up on.
I think it's getting, just like it happened in the generations before, I don't want it to be so broken that it's lost.
Yeah.
You know, that's what I'm trying to prevent.
Well, hopefully that does not happen.
Yeah.
Hopefully that does not happen.
Yeah.
So, cool. Good conversation, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
Got to talk about some new stuff.
Yeah. I think we'll get a little bit more personal about why I'm different even though I'm a millennial. And why you're different even though you're a millennial.
I'm down to talk about it.
Yeah.
If you want to talk about it.
I think it would be interesting.
Let me
We'll
know.
be talking more about our families
Sure.
and what you believe in and where you came from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We can talk about that. We don't
And
have
even
we
though
don't have
how-
a perfect marriage. We've been
Yeah.
around for 10 years and we don't have perfect kids, but we have 3 that
Yeah.
other people say are quite well-mannered and intelligent and
We
able,
hope.
you know.
They're not just saying that to our
Yeah, we
faces.
hope they're not lying to us. Yes.
Yeah.
But I think some of these old school principles that we've adopted as truths have really helped us in those areas
Yeah.
of life where they are not helping other people that have lost them.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's kind of why we're wanting to talk about some of
Yeah,
these
I think
things.
a lot of good that has happened in our marriage that allowed us to be 10 years in this long generation that we're classified in as millennials.
It's absolutely from old school foundational principles.
It is, but
yeah.
I think it's also understanding the history of where we came from.
Yeah,
Understanding
that's
the roles.
there's probably some truth there.
And accepting the roles that we've been
And
built
accepting
to do.
accepting our biology, accepting our God-given roles and
Yeah.
rights and
Yeah.
responsibilities in life,
Yeah.
in marriage,
Yeah.
in parenting.
And I think communication has also played a big part too.
Yep. Hasn't always been perfect.
No, but I think communication with the trying to do the communication in respect.
Yeah.
You know, because
And being open, being
Yeah.
honest, being truthful, being
because I think that's
forthright.
the best form of communication. We've learned that open, honest communication is the best communication
Stems
that you
off
can
a
have.
lot of offense and problems
Yep.
if you
And
can
expectations
if you can
that
nip
are uncommunicated.
Yep, you can nip those offenses
Yep.
in the bud early on.
Yep.
They don't turn into the horrible dragons in your
Yeah.
life that they otherwise could should they
Right.
keep getting fed under the rug. Like most of us
Yeah.
passively, aggressively like to deal with our problems,
Yeah.
which is just,
I'll get over it.
kick it under the rug.
Don't poke at it.
Yeah,
It's like
but
the big elephant in the room.
Yeah, but all that stuff always comes back.
Yeah.
So, cool.
Yeah.
Good. Love you.